Hey, hello everyone. Are you working on Kubernetes or Docker? If yes, I have a quick tip and guide for you, I think, which can help you very quickly to implement. So, number one, if you're working on the Docker, you probably know you need a Docker file which you use to containerize any applications. And one quick tip is always use multi-stage Docker build. That will reduce your image and it will be more effective. So use multi-stage Docker build. And once you build your Docker container, what happens is that it if you are using in your own laptop or something and install Docker, it goes to your local Docker registry. So the container always lives in a registry. Now, typically in enterprise setting, we need a container registry. So there are various container registry, like if you're using any on-prem version, you have Artifactory, or you have your GitHub Enterprise has its own GitHub container registry. Similarly, if you're using cloud version, every cloud has their own container registry, like Azure has Azure Container Registry, ACR, Google has its own container registry, samely in AWS also has. And also if you're using GitHub has its own container registry. So second stage is you have to basically push that image which you build into a remote container registry. Then you basically make sure that the container has no vulnerability. That's why a lot of container registry has built-in container registry scanning feature, so you can go, like if you're in Google, or you can see the built-in, or you need to use an external tool to scan the image to make sure there is no known vulnerability. So that's the second step. So then once it is in the registry, you can bring that image and you can deploy that into a Docker container. That's basically. So the now next step is, okay, Docker was good, so it's a single container you're running as an application, but when you want to scale out, then you need multiple container, and that's why orchestration engine like Kubernetes comes into picture. So to now deploy a container which is running on the Docker, let's say you wanted to move into the Kubernetes and then go into more enterprise scale way, the first thing is the container has to be in a container registry. The next thing is, at a fundamental levels, you need to basically create couple of Kubernetes resources. So Kubernetes has various resources. I'm going to talk only the few resources which is need for container deployment. So the first resources is, and you can define those resources with a YAML file. There is a kind where you can mention the resource type and all the details of the resources. I'm not going in details, but the first resource is deployment. You need to create a Kubernetes resource called deployment YAML file. And then the second thing is, once you create a deployment, the next thing is you need to expose the deployment. Once you create a deployment, it will create a pod for you. So there's a replica set. You can say, okay, how many pod you want 1, 2, 3. So those many pods will be created, and you know how pod works. It's like it's like a cattle, you just kill it and it recreates again. You don't really repair it. But that's okay. But how do you expose that pod, let's say, in an application without? That's why service comes into picture. Service actually gives you an ability to load balance among the pod, internal pod, and give you an ability to have a VIP, like a virtual IP address, to orchestrate the traffic among the pod. And that's why the service comes into picture, but still it's not exposed to the outside world. And that is why in Kubernetes we also have the concept called ingress, where you can create an ingress and assign basically a DNS to access the pod and expose it to the outside. Also you can use another something called virtual service. So now these are all which I talked about. And also, let's say your application needs a persistent storage or persistence volume, you can create a persistence volume claim, PVC, and then you can refer that PVC into deployment, and so that in certain directory or mount, you can mount that. So that's a second concept. But all I told you about deployment, persistence volume claim, or let's say your service, all these things are basically the core Kubernetes resources. Now you can extend that core Kubernetes resources, that is called CRD, custom resource definition. So there's one of them you can use. It's most frequently used as a part of the Istio implementation, is called virtual service, which actually gives you an ability to balance your load. Let's say you can define, 10% of the load is going to go to this pod and 10% on this. So you can define the distribution of load, and that's very good for when you have a blue green deployment or canary deployment strategy. So you can use the virtual service. Also, it allows you to track traffic in a better way. So it matters the traffic management. It's kind of a proxy layer, and that's why Istio is being used. So one of the thing is that when you use your kubectl, so all these things you can apply with a single command: kubectl apply -f and the file name, and then everything what I'm mentioning in the file name you can apply it. But when you try to actually, and another cool tip is always create a namespace. So the way Kubernetes works is under namespace. It has its own system namespace, and it has its user defined create names. Namespace is like a logical boundary, folder. So in a Kubernetes you basically have a namespace and make sure you are working within your namespace. So you have multiple application, and in an enterprise they might have different namespace in the same cluster, and that's why make sure system namespace and user namespace, so that you make sure that. So one call out is that the kubectl command, when you try to find out, let's give me all the resources, kubectl, let's say get all namespace -n namespace, it doesn't go to show you the CRD or custom resource definition like virtual services. Very, very important point. So let's say you need to, when you wanted to get a CRD, there is no way to get all the CRD. There might be new way, I don't know, but what I figured out is there's no way you can't do that. You have to define the individual CRD. Let's say you wanted to find all virtual services, then you have to define virtual services. Let's say you define your own CRD for some other reason, you need to mention that there's not way to get all. There might be other tools. Another thing is that this is the normal way. So a lot of people use him chart, which gives another abstraction layer and better way to manage it. So I'll talk in another video about him, but I hope this helps. This is a cool quick guide, for a refresher. If you already are working, this is not going to tell you, won't understand anything unless you're already working on it. If you're already working, hope this video will help you. Thank you.